Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am excited to welcome a dear friend of the show, Linda Burhans. Linda is a trailblazer for caregivers through her radio program, her Tuesday tips, and her caregiver conferences. Linda is helping to support caregivers worldwide. Welcome, Linda. How are you today?
I am joyful and grateful and glad to be here today.
We're glad to have you. So, Linda, let's start a little bit with your backstory. How did you get so involved with supporting and connecting caregivers?
Well, to make a long story short, I moved to Florida from Long Island, in case you can't tell.
A little bit.
Yeah. And a few years later, my mom moved down, and my mom ended up getting stage 4 colon cancer, dementia, and I wrote a book. I moved in with her the last couple of weeks of her life, and I tucked her into bed one night, and she said to me, "Good night and God bless," which she said to me thousands of times before, but I thought it was going to be the last time I was going to hear it.
Wow.
I prayed in her living room that night, "God, please just give me a little bit longer." And the next morning she looked good. So I started writing my book, Good Night and God Bless. And I wrote through the last 3 weeks of her life and my grieving process, and then I reconstructed our adventure from my journals and my calendar. And the book was published right away. Oh my goodness. And I went out to promote the book, and every single time people came up to me crying, saying they needed help. And no one told me about anything when I took care of my mother. And
Right.
I'm not a dumb bunny, but you don't know what you don't know. So that was about 4,000 support groups, workshops, radio shows ago. And I am the gal who cares for the caregivers with love, laughter, and lessons learned, because I got a whole bunch of all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, and you do conferences, like you mentioned. You also have a radio show that, we were privileged to be on a week ago. Talk about how that started. Like, how do you go from writing this book to then the support groups, the conferences, the radio show?
The momentum happened. People really needed the information. And as most people know with me, what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
So people, I'm very relatable. So it started with some speaking engagements about the book. Then it started with some speaking engagements about caregiving, and then the support groups. And then I was a guest on a lot of other people's radio shows. And this one particular channel, I was probably on 5 different shows, and they said, "You need your own show." And I said, "Yeah, I do." And we're in our 6th year now.
Wow, congratulations. And it's a wonderful show, and we're going to have the links to all of this in our show notes and up on the screen. But I want to talk about the AAA or the AAA Dilemma. Explain to our viewers and listeners who may not be familiar with it what exactly that is.
Okay, what I call the AAA Dilemma is caregivers do not accept help, they do not ask for help, and they do not appreciate themselves. And I see it every single day. A neighbor will come over to a caregiver or a friend or even a family member, and they say to the caregiver, "Anything I can do to help you?" And the caregiver says every time, "No, I'm okay."
Yeah.
Which is furthest from the truth. Well, I think the first problem is the caregiver is thinking, now I got to think of something you can help me with. I can't even think straight.
Right.
So I suggest to caregivers take a little time and sit down and write a list of a few things you can accept help with. Mowing the lawn, picking up some groceries. And when someone comes, just give them the list and say, pick one. And they'll be more than glad to. Shortly after my mother passed away, I met a woman in the supermarket, and she said to me, "How you doing, Linda?" And I said, "I'm okay." Yeah. And she said, "I'm sick of hearing you say that. I have to tell you, when you took care of your mother, you stole my joy." And I said, "I did what?" And she said, "I could see you swimming in quicksand, and every time I asked to help you, you said, 'No, I'm okay.' And you never gave me the opportunity to meet your mom either." So I think we need to pay attention to that. And once you start doing that, it makes things a lot easier, because people want to help you. They wouldn't be asking you if they didn't want to help you. And a lot of times caregivers think, well, if I ask for help, I'm weak. No, if you ask for help, you're strong. You're strong. It takes a village. This is not an easy job.
Right.
This is not an easy job. And because what happens if you keep saying no, then people stop asking you. And then you're home at night crying, I have to do this all by myself. Well, you said no to everybody.
Right.
So I want caregivers to think about that. One of my caregivers, for a long time, we kept talking about this in a support group. And one day she came to the group and she said, I let my neighbor mow my lawn. And we're all like, yay. She goes, but I told him he didn't have to do the edging. We're like, no, let him do the edging. But that was a big step forward for her.
Do you think the issue, and I think it's probably a little bit of both, do you think it's that they're not aware that they need the help, or that they're embarrassed to ask for the help and to accept it?
I think maybe it's a little of each. I think caregivers are getting burned out. Caregivers are so busy taking care of the person they're taking care of that they don't take care of themselves. They take their loved one to the doctor. They don't go to the doctor. They make sure their loved one's eating properly. They're not eating properly. So it's so important, because you will not be able to take care of your loved one. I see caregivers die before the person they're taking care of. Just yesterday, another caregiver that was in my support group, he died. He's been taking care of his wife. Well, what happens to her now?
Yeah.
So I think it's so important that just ask for help, because you want to help.
Right.
You want to help. I want to help when I ask someone. And sometimes if someone's listening to this that's not a caregiver, but they know a caregiver, when you go to the supermarket, just get the BOGO and bring it over their house. Just bring over a meal.
Right.
And then they'll get used to it a little bit. And probably
awesome.
their loved one wants to see somebody else too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because as much as we think we're the bomb caregiver, no one can do it like I can do it, and this is my responsibility. I think many times your loved one is sitting there thinking, could you go away for a little while and could I see somebody else?
It's like changing the channel, right?
Yeah.
Just a little variety. Yeah.
Well, caregivers will tell me they finally get some respite care, and then they come back and your loved one goes, oh, you're so much happier.
Yeah.
And one caregiver said, I didn't realize it until I went on a caregiver retreat that I was gritting my teeth. Because we're doing a good job.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So I know you mentioned about the meals and, even cutting the lawn, and you have a great story I want you to share after I ask this question about the two ladies you met in the mailroom. But what do you think are the best ways that you can help your loved one or help a caregiver who may not be accepting or acknowledging they need that help? How do you start that conversation?
Sometimes you just go and you tell them, I love you and I care about you. And I know you may not see you need some help, but you need some help.
Yeah.
And I want to spend some time with your loved one. I really want to spend some time with your loved one also. I had one girlfriend and she was taking care of her dad. I just went over her house with a pizza one day and said, go in the bedroom and go sleep. Me and your dad are having a pizza, going for a walk. Sometimes that's what you have to do.
A little forceful.
Yeah. And like there's a story about the two ladies in my mailroom. So I went to get some mail and two ladies were in there I didn't know, and I see one lady opens her mailbox and tons of mail falls on the floor. And she started crying, and I'm thinking, it's only mail. And I started picking it up, and all of a sudden she said, I'm taking care of my husband with dementia. I'm so isolated, I can't even pick up my mail. And the other lady in the room says, me too, my husband has dementia. I said, you ladies need to be friends, and you need to be friends with me. And now I see them sometimes walking around the complex together. And I've seen that happen with other people. There was in one of my support groups, because a lot of them are virtual now. I have live, but also virtual. There were two women, and they found out after they joined the support group that they lived in the same complex. They didn't even know they lived in the same complex. So what they started doing is they have like a clubhouse, and they take their husbands to the pool, the room where the pool table is, and they play their own game of pool, and the ladies just sit there and chat. How cool is that? They get to socialize. You know that you're not alone. And the more we do this, then other people are open to not being fearful about talking about caregiving.
Right.
When I first started doing this 15 years ago, I had to tell caregivers who they were before I could help them.
Right.
Because I'm just the good daughter or the faithful spouse or the best friend. No, you're a caregiver.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's extremely overwhelming. And, I kind of harken back to when you were caring for your mom. These resources probably weren't as readily available as they are now. I was talking to somebody last week, and they've been doing something for, 5 years, 6 years. And they said even 10 years ago, none of this was available when they were going through it. And here we're living in the greatest country in the world with the most resources in the world. In 2012, 2013, you're caring for a parent or a spouse. The resources weren't as available or as accessible as they are now. And here we are, with your radio show, your conferences, your over 4,000 support groups. I mean, I think that says a lot, though, to how desperately needed these resources are for people and being able to access them. So talk.
It's so funny because people will say to me, I wish I knew you when I was taking care of my loved one. I said, I wish I knew me then too.
Right. Yes.
Because I didn't know either. I didn't even know my mother had dementia until after she died.
Wow.
Because we focused on cancer. That's what it was.
Yeah.
And she was on medications. And I thought, she's just being my goofy mom.
Right.
No way. And there was different things. I can remember one time my mom calling me, and she lived in independent living.
Okay.
And so she said, someone's coming in this apartment and messing with my papers. She had that sacred stack of papers next to the telephone. You know how we have that?
Yeah.
Well, my mom lives in independent living. I know no one is going in there. So after like the third day, because I would pick her up early in the morning, she'd spend the whole day with me, whatever I was doing. I said, you know what? I'm just going to go upstairs and see what's going on. I went upstairs. Nothing was moved or anything. And I just said, Mom, wait a minute. I'll be right back. And I went down to down the hallway, and I just stood down the hallway for a little while. And then I came back and I said, Mom, I said, I just met that witch out in the hallway. And I told her, if you ever mess with my mother's papers again, you're going to have to answer to me. And she said, thank you, Linda. And it stopped. Well, I didn't know anything, but I just wanted my mother not to be agitated.
Right. Right.
And that's what I teach people to do now.
Be in their reality. Yeah.
I said, you teach people to be liars? I said, no, I teach people to become compassionate.
Yes, absolutely.
To the person you're caring for and yourself.
Yes. You have to take care of yourself so that you can take care of your loved one. It's not being selfish. It's not being neglectful. Because, and I know you tell people the same thing, but if you don't take care of yourself and something happens to you, there's no one there for your loved one.
And do you think your loved one wants to live their last weeks, months, years with you being nutsy?
Right.
With you being stressed? They can tell.
Absolutely.
With you running around doing this and doing that. I want to be the caregiver. I want to be the daughter. I want to be the spouse. I want to let somebody else help me with some of this stuff so I can sit down and hold Mom's hand. That's the most important thing. We're taking care of our most precious commodities.
Absolutely. Linda, do you think the hardest thing for a caregiver is to either acknowledge that they're a caregiver or accept that they need help? What do you find is the most difficult step for them?
Well, I think it's much better now. I think people are accepting help because there are more conferences, there are more radio shows, there are more seminars, there's more information, and we're talking about it more on the news. We were never, so I think that's made it a little bit more acceptable. And I think, and I always say, caregiving can be, your caregiving experience can be the most horrific experience in your life or close to beautiful, depending on how you handle it. Mm-hmm. And so by coming to support groups and workshops and learning, your journey is definitely better. No doubt about it. No doubt about it. But I think one of the other things I want to talk to you about today, which I think is really important, is about finding a purpose for your loved one. Because people come to the support group and they're like, Mom's just sitting in the chair. She doesn't do anything. Well, first of all, you probably took everything away from her. Because if I make the fruit salad, I can make it in 10 minutes. If Mom's going to help me make the fruit salad, it might take a half hour. But who am I serving?
Right.
Who am I serving? And I remember one day a woman came to my support group. Her mother had passed away recently. She had been in my support group for a while, and she came back and she said, Linda, ever since my mother passed away, my dad just sits in the chair. They were married for 48 years. They did everything together. She said, I don't know what to do. She said, I took him to the doctor. The doctor gave him an antidepressant, but I think he's going to die in that chair. So I said, tell me something your dad used to do when he was younger. She said he used to build these big model ships. I said, could he still do that? She said, his hands are kind of arthritic, Linda. I said, would you like to try an experiment? She said, I'll try anything. I said, go to Michael's craft store. They have these wooden cars, about 12 pieces to put together. Buy a dozen of them. I said, I know a nursery school that could use them. And she came to Dad and she said, Dad, do you think you could paint these and put them together for this nursery school? Well, before he passed away, he made something like 70 dozen boats and cars that he was sending to schools, that he was Zooming with schools, that kids were saying thank you. He woke up with that purpose every morning. And the one car he named after his wife. So he was like, here's the Nellie car, or whatever the name was. And I said to her, well, it must have got a little expensive buying all those supplies and shipping it everywhere. She said, you know what, Linda? It was cheaper than what I was paying for the antidepressant.
Yeah, there you go.
Win-win. And then people say to you, but my mom really can't do anything. There's not much she can do these days. Well, first of all, I want you to go back and I want you to think about what mom did in her previous life. So we have one woman who her mom was a banker. So every day they give her a big jar of coins and a whole bunch of those paper rolls. And she sits at the table and her daughter says, we need to bring these to the bank tomorrow. And she fills them all up. And then when she goes to sleep, she puts them back. But she feels like she has a purpose.
Yeah.
Another woman was a seamstress. We give her a big jar of buttons and a whole bunch of little boxes to sort them in. And she said, it takes my mother 2 hours a day to do it. That's the 2 hours that I can breathe. Mom's sitting at the table. She said she sorts them by color or by size or whatever. And every now and then she picks up that one button and she said, just like on the dress I made you for your first communion. She goes, and I sit down, I have a conversation with her.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be wanted. Everybody wants, and if you approach your loved one with, this is something that you're helping me with, not like I'm giving you a job. Could you please help me with this, Mom?
Right.
They want to help you.
Absolutely. And we tell families all the time, let your loved ones contribute. Even if it's the laundry, give them a basket of towels, let them just sit there and fold them and then start all over again. It's serving two purposes, right? Like you said, it's a win-win. It's giving that family member, that caregiver, a little breather so that they can get some things done or sit in a chair. But it's also letting their loved one still feel like they're able to contribute because they still want to contribute. They're not dead. They're not disabled. And, they still have value that they can contribute in some way. It's just finding the way that's going to work best for them.
I got to tell you one more story with this. There was a woman, she said, Linda, my mother followed me around the house all day long. Drives me out of my mind. If I could just get her to sit down for a while. I said, can I come meet your mom? So I went and met her mom, and her mom was like 90-something. And she used to be a teacher. So first we talked about all the rotten kids these days. Not really. And then we talked about how the teachers aren't paid well enough. And what we do is every Monday morning, we give Mom a big piece of poster board and a bunch of magazines. And we tell her that next week the teachers are teaching the kids about flowers. So we need you to cut all the flowers out of these magazines and glue them on this poster board. And you can't have any white spots. Mm-hmm. It takes her almost a week to do it. Well, her daughter started bringing it to the school, actually. And kids started sending thank you notes. And so she feels like she's got a purpose. And when you have someone with dementia, the theme could be flowers every week.
Right.
It doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that bottle of change or that jar of change will be there every day, because it's a bank, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
When people reach out to you, Linda, and let's say they're not, in your local area there in Florida, because you're in, I think, Seminole, Florida. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm between Clearwater and St. Pete.
Okay. And they're wanting to find resources. Where do you direct them? I know lindaburhans.com is a great website. You have a lot of wonderful resources. We'll have that up here on the screen. But aside from your website, what other suggestions do you recommend?
On my website, too, there are links to other people's websites. If you go under events, you'll see the support groups that I facilitate live and via Zoom, but also support groups facilitated by other people I know because they're so important. I'm not the only girl on the block anymore.
Sure.
So I'm glad to pass. So I think the first thing is to get into a support group. A woman came into a support group. This was right before the pandemic. And she came in the support group and she said, my doctor said I need a support group. I said, oh, welcome. And everybody was very welcoming to her. Sure. And she said to me, so what do you do here? So I said, we share resources. We share a shoulder to cry on. We share some laughs. We share some tips. So she goes to me, give me a tip. I go, excuse me? She goes, give me a tip. I said, I don't know if this is appropriate for you, but this is my tip. If your husband has to go to the doctor's on Friday, don't tell him on Monday. Because you know he's going to ask all day,
All week.
Monday, and he's going to be apprehensive, and you're going to be apprehensive. She said, oh my goodness, my husband was up at 3:30 this morning, all dressed, ready to go to the doctor's. She slapped the table. She said, I think I'm going to like this group. But that's what you learn. And caregivers sometimes do silly things. And when you hear that somebody else did the same thing, or their loved one did something that you think is embarrassing or crazy, you find out
Right.
your neighbor's doing the same thing, the lady across the street's doing the same thing.
And you're not alone.
And you're not alone.
Yeah.
And you're not alone. And especially today, I mean, there's so many resources between Zooms and people like Tipa Snow and you know, the Eden Alternative. There are so many different, you know, and what you do, there's just so much out there. And people are responding to it.
Right.
You see it.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
like, oh my goodness, I'll put out a Tuesday tip and I find in, you know, 3 days it's got 2,000 views. People are waiting for this information. They need this information.
They need it. They need it. Let's talk about the conferences that you host. These are virtual right now, right?
Yes, this will be the 4th one. It's May 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So it's 3 days, 21 speakers from the comfort of your home. So you can be in your pajamas. Nobody has to see you. You don't have to find someone to take care of your loved one. You don't have to go park anywhere. Totally free to caregivers, thanks to the wonderful partners we have. But one of the things I want people to know the most is I don't expect anybody to sit there for 3 days and watch it. I can barely do it. I just suggest that continue to register, because as long as you register, within 30 days, you receive 21 videos of the conference that you can watch at your leisure or whenever you want, or share with your family. And every conference, we have different speakers. I mean, we are going to have Voices of Aphasia on here. They were on the last conference, and I thought I knew a lot about aphasia, and guess what? I didn't. Yeah. And I learned a whole lot, and I continue to learn a whole lot from the conferences, from bringing new speakers in and new ideas and new technologies. People like Cindy and Christina, you know, they've been part of every conference, and every conference at lunchtime they bring out and show us the newest and greatest tools that can help caregivers. You know, and then also every day at lunchtime we have either meditation or yoga or something like that. So we have something for everybody here.
Speaking of Cindy and Christina, are they going to stop by on their road trip?
Yes, they can't be on the show. We can't, but I've hooked them up with a couple of places to speak down here.
Right.
We're definitely getting together.
Yeah,
they're just so fabulous.
They're a lot of fun, and you know, I told them, if you know, next time they go on a trip or they want to know, come through Michigan, because they're in Illinois, but they're on the Missouri, you know, the border, so it's not as close. But yeah, I said we'd love to have you come by and you know, connect you with some senior living communities and centers here in our area. They're fun, but they're bringing a lot of value and, you know, resources to these families. Because, you know, kind of like you said at the beginning, one of my favorite sayings, Linda, is you don't know what you don't know. Oh. And, you know, we had a gentleman 10 years ago, maybe 8 years ago, and he was retired because we're in Michigan, Motor City, UAW capital. And he retired from the UAW, and we were invited to speak at their national, you know, gathering, conference, whatever you want to call it, downtown. And he came up and asked if he could meet with us afterwards, and we said, of course. And he wanted to meet at his mother's house. Now, she lives in one of these big, you know, just beautiful, historic Detroit homes that are just, you know, bigger than most elementary schools. And she was in rehab. Well, rehab would not allow her to return home until she had a hospital bed. Very simple, because she had a hip replacement, and she's tiny, and she had one of the old style beds that are, you know, 3.5, 4 feet to get on top of. Yeah. And he said, but I just, you know, it's a lot of money. We said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, the nursing home says we have to, you know, buy the hospital bed through their supplier, and then they'll deliver it, and it's like $4,500. No. And so our nurse who works with us, she was with us when we met with them at the home, and we're like, wait a minute, why aren't you having them write an order through your Medicare, durable medical equipment, DME, and that will help take care of the cost, you know? And he's like, oh, well, are you sure? Like, he was questioning it, like, how could this possibly happen? Well, we said, tell you what, because he wasn't looking to hire us for services. He was just, and we're happy to meet with him to help however we can. And we just said, do this. Don't ask the nursing home. Call your mother's primary care doctor, explain the situation, and ask him if it's possible he could write an order for her to get a hospital bed. This man was probably in his late 70s because his mom was close to 100, and hard UAW worker, a man's man kind of, so to speak.
Yeah.
He called us that next night and was bawling his eyes out and just said, I cannot thank you enough. $4,500 is a lot of money to us. We said it's a lot of money to anybody. And especially when you can get it just by getting an order for it.
And other resources out there. There are lending closets. There are things that people don't even know about. When COVID, my daughter's a hairdresser. When COVID first started, she started going to some of her, especially her senior clients' homes and cutting their hair outside.
Nice. Yeah.
And so she went to this. Now, she's never been to their homes before, right? They can come to the salon. She said, and I went to this one guy's house, Mom, and he lives in a mobile home, and he has a gaping hole in the floor with a piece of plywood laying on top of it, and he can't even get his wheelchair across the room.
Wow.
So I called the local police department here, and I said to my friend, my officer friend, I said, can you do a welfare check? Sure, Linda. 3 days later, he calls me and he tells me, sorry, it took me 3 days to get back to you, but Harry's getting a whole new floor, a wheelchair lift to get him in and out of the place, all from a grant.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So reach out, caregivers. Talk to your people in your church, in your civic associations, your neighbors. Somebody knows somebody.
Right.
Contact somebody like me or you, because if I don't have the answer, I'll find you the answer.
Absolutely. That's right.
And we're so blessed to be surrounded by professionals that really want to make a difference in the lives of our caregivers and their loved ones. Take advantage of that, people, please.
Yeah. And, kind of along those same lines, we tell people all the time, if you have an elderly person that lives on your street or in your neighborhood and you haven't seen them in a couple of days, just stop by, knock on the door and say, hey, just want to say hi, or, grab their mail and bring it to the door, because you don't know, they might be a situation inside that, nobody else is aware of. Just like this gentleman, what would have happened if your daughter hadn't happened to go there to cut his hair?
He'd still be in the same situation, probably.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, like you said, that man called you crying. The neighbors called my daughter crying. You just changed that man's life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just by reaching out, just by
doing a good thing, and took very little time. It doesn't take a lot. Just a phone call, a stop at the house. You can make all the difference in the world. Absolutely. Yeah. Linda, what else do you want to share with our viewers and listeners?
The most important thing is to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And know that your loved one knows everything that you're going through. So if you're not taking care of yourself, that's even more pressure on your loved one. And bring in your family and friends, and maybe it's not your family, maybe it's friends, maybe it's hiring someone to come in and help. Just get somebody to come in and help. And so you could spend some time with your loved one, being the spouse, being the daughter, being the sister. Because none of us know when our time is up. None of us know, how it goes.
Yeah.
I see it every day. And the caregivers that come to the support groups and the conferences, you can see a difference in how they care as to someone who doesn't, as to someone who is isolated or feels like they're isolated. And just know, and know at the end of your caregiving experience, there's somewhere to go after that. A lot of my caregivers pass away, their loved one passes away, they come back to the support group, and what the heck do I do now?
Right.
So in my one support group, I've started a mentor program. So if your husband died from Parkinson's and a new person comes in the group that her husband has Parkinson's, you know all the ins and outs already. You can be the mentor and talk during the groups. And also the last session of the conference is going to be called I Fly Solo. And it's going to be for the caregivers that are now flying solo and where we go from here.
Wonderful. Great idea.
How do we find our life now?
Yeah.
So.
And we'll have a link to the conference as well up on the screen and in the show notes. Two last things. Share with our viewers and listeners how they can listen and watch your weekly radio program.
You can just go to YouTube to Connecting Caregivers Radio. You can go it's on Facebook every week, also live. And you can go to my website. My website has every Tuesday tip. I do a Tuesday tip every Tuesday, like 3 to 6 minutes for caregivers. It has the radio shows, it has my podcast, it has wherever I'm gallivanting around town, it'll tell you.
Well, and when is it broadcast live as well? Because you have a call-in. People can call in and ask you questions.
Yeah, it's every Friday at 1 o'clock.
Friday at 1.
If I call into the station, it's 727-441-3000.
Okay.
And please register for the conference. There's something there for everybody. Just go to connectingcaregiversconference.com.
Absolutely. Well, last question for Linda. What is your go-to number one tip? We said, take care of yourself, but for a new caregiver who is just stepping on this journey, what is the number one thing you recommend that they do?
Get into a support group.
Support group. Good advice.
You're going to learn more in a support group than anywhere else, and from people that are exactly on the same page as you.
Wonderful. Linda, I appreciate you. I just admire you and respect everything you're doing and your friendship. And we look forward to working with you again in the future. And everybody's going to go visit lindaburhans.com and the connectingcaregiversconference.com. And hopefully they'll check out the radio program. We were really honored to be a part of it last week, and just great discussions and topics that you guys cover. And it's a great show. Thank you again. And hopefully
I'll be in Michigan next year, and I'll come visit you.
Well, I'm going to hold you to it.
Okay.
All right.
Come.
Wonderful. Well, there's an open invitation, Linda. Thank you so much.
Have a delicious day, and God bless.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms or watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Linda Burhans for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.